I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today we're doing chapter 8, which is, as you see over here in the text, of those princes, right, or those who obtain through wickedness, of those who through wickedness attain to the principate. Okay, this is the famous line. Again, remember all the titles are originally in Latin. De Alvarez gives you the link to the hid de his qui securius ad principatum pervers pervenere. Right? My Latin, I can't, bad Latin, bad teacher Latin, right? So therefore, this is the princes who obtained their through wickedness attain principates. This is very interesting. Wickedness, right? But because one rises from a private station and becomes a prince, is still two more modes, right? So therefore, continuing he comes from a private stage and becomes a prince. There's two more modes, right? We did if we looked at the previous modes, one through their own, the two modes of this was previously was the arms of other through their own virtues, through their own virtues and their arms and their own virtues, and through the fortune and the arms of others, right? Those are the other two, and therefore there's not the next one, right? It's two more. There's still two more, he says. Neither of which is wholly attributable to fortune or to virtue. So next two are going to be, in other words, that you cannot do virtue or fortune to them. Okay, so the first one arms of he started with virtue, fortune. Now he mentions he reverses the order. Says fortune and virtue, right? It does not seem to me that I should omit them, even though it is possible to reason on one of them at more length in a treatise on Republic. Okay, now this is, in other words, he's going to say we should talk about this in a treatise on Republic, and this is Discourse 3. Machiavelli does go on greater about wickedness. One of these is Discourse 3. Discourses Book 3. So he's gonna introduce them, but it'll be more reasonable to talk about them at length because they're about people who betray the Republic, right? These two modes are when one ascends to the principate by some wickedness, a nefarious way, or when a private citizen, by the favor of his fellow citizens, becomes a prince of his fatherland. So there's two ways, two modes. One is a prince, someone who, through wickedness and nefarious things, obtains the principate. And the other way is that the citizens, as a private citizen, through the favor of his fellow citizens, become a prince. And what is said of the first mode will be demonstrated with two examples, one ancient and the other modern, without entering otherwise into the merits of such a mode, because I judge them sufficient, for whomever would find it necessary to imitate them. So, in other words, he's going to basically just give of the first mode. He's going to focus on the first mode, which is the two modes. One is by wickedness, by some wicked or nefarious ways, and then the other one is through that the citizens make them prince. Okay, these are the two ways they're left to deal with. But first, he's going to talk about only here today in this chapter. He's only going to deal with the first mode, that is through wickedness, right? And he's going to give only two examples, one ancient, one modern. And he's not going to go any deeper into this thing because the examples he seems to suggest are what? That I judge it sufficient. In other words, I without entering otherwise into the merits of this mode. In other words, he's not going to talk about the merits of this mode. Because why? He says it's just sufficient that I'm going to give two examples, and you should imitate them if you want. If in other words, for whomever finds it necessary to imitate, in other words, they're worthy of imitation. Okay. So first, Agathocles, Agathocles, the Sicilian, not only from a private but from a low abject fortune, becomes king of Syracuse. Right. That man, who was born of a parter, always led a wicked life at every stage. Nevertheless, he accompanied his wickedness with such virtue of mind and body that when he joined the militia, he rose through the ranks and became the praetor of Syracuse, like leader of the, in other words, he get his position of this. So Agathocles, wicked every stage of his life, born of vile, potter, no skill, low subject, abject fortune, right? And wicked all every stage of his life, but he accompanied that wickedness with what? Such virtue of mind and body that he rose through the ranks of the militia, that he became praetor. Once established in that rank, he determined to become a prince and to hold it with violence, without obligation to others, that which by agreement that had been conceded to him. Okay, in other words, okay. Once in that rank of praetor, he determined to become a prince and hold it with violence, hold it by violence. He said, right, with violence, and without obligation to others, not being deplied by others, and that which by agreement had been conducted. In other words, he originally been given that position of authority by kind of an agreement conceded to him, but now he's going to do it on his own terms, right? This is it. And having given intelligence of his plan to Hamilcar, the Carthaginian, who was fighting with his armies in Syracuse, he assembled the people in the Senate of Syracuse as to deliberate on things pertinent to the Republic. And upon the given signal, he had the soldiers kill all the senators and the richest of the people. And once they were dead, he seized and held the principate of that city without any civil controversy. In other words, he killed the richest of the people, he killed all the senators and the richest people. And once they were dead, he seized it and held that principate without any civil controversy, right? In other words, there's no agitation against him. Civil controversy, I mean, there's no agitation against him. There was no rebellion against him in that sense. There's the leaders who could do it are gone, right? And although he was twice broken in the field by the Carthaginians and ultimately besieged, he was able not only to defend his city, but leaving part of his troops to defend against siege, he assaulted Africa with the others, and in a short time not only liberated Syracuse from the siege, but drove the Carthaginians into extreme necessity. And they were necessitated to come to an agreement with him. They had to be satisfied with the possessions of Africa and leave Sicily to Agathocles. So, in other words, okay, what did he do? In other words, not only was he able to hold it together, what he could do, he could then what? He could leave the city, his own. In other words, the city he was tyrant of, the city he took. He basically took by wicked means, by killing the senators and that. He could leave with a small part of his troops, and then he assaulted Africa with the others, right? And that he liberated Syracuse and drove the Carthaginians into such necessity that they had to basically agree with him that they could keep Africa and leave Sicily to him, right? Drove them out of that. Whomever might consider then the actions and life of that man will see nothing or little which can be attributed to fortune. In other words, and nothing, or maybe just a little that can be attributed to fortune. For that which he gained, as was said above, was not through the favor of anyone, but but by his ascent through the ranks of the militia, with 1,000 hardships and dangers. With the principate, he then with the principate. In other words, his He never got through favor of anyone. He rose up the rank. And all the dangers and hardships, right? He says, and then with the Principate, then he, moreover, maintained with many spirited and dangerous decisions. Okay, so in other words, the judgment of the skills and judgments he learned in the militia then became necessary in the sense of rising in the rank of the militia, became useful for him in doing, as prince, right? When the prince, he, however, maintained with many spirited and dangerous decisions. Still, one cannot call it virtue to kill his fellow citizens, to betray his friends, to be without faith, without pity, without religion, which modes enabled him to acquire imperium, but not glory. Now, this is note 3. This is that weird note. Here is that, again, this is the idea of virtue. What this is about, what virtue means. But you can't call it virtue to kill the citizens, to betray friends, to be without faith, without pity, without religion. Those things that enabled him to acquire imperium, but not glory, those things that he did, these breaches of killing fellow citizens, betraying friends, being without faith, without pity, without religion. If if one considers the virtue, because we can't call it virtue, but then he says, let us consider, if one considers the virtue of Agathocles by entering in and escaping from dangers, and the greatness of his mind in standing up to and overcoming adverse things, one sees, one does not see why he shouldn't have to be judged inferior to any of the most excellent captains. Okay, remember this is for, this is the capitino. The captain here is referred to the art of warfare, right? And the previous, in other words, he is a man capable of commanding men and possessing strategic art. That the prince must be a captain is explicitly stated in chapter 12. Since Machiavelli claims to be able to educate princes in the art of war, chapter 14 below, and write a book called The Art of War, one wonders if he himself is a captain, right? This is Machiavelli's. He cannot be, but who are the other excellent captains? The other excellent captains is those great captains of arms of others, by their own arms, all the way a couple chapters earlier. Theseus, what is it? Romulus, Theseus, Cyrus, and Moses, right? And then Hero as well, right? And the fifth one, right? That's presented at the end, the example of Hero, which kind of similar, Hero in many ways similar to Agathocles, right? In other words, inferior to any of the most excellent. Nevertheless, his brutal cruelty and humanity and his infinite wickedness does not allow that he be among the most excellent celebrated men. So he cannot. In other words, he doesn't. He cannot. We don't want to say he's like them. But he's still. In other words, his cruelty, his humanity, and his infinite wickedness does not allow him to be among the most excellent self. In other words, it's his cruelty and his inhumanity that prevents him from being with those four that we mentioned earlier, the first four, right? One cannot attribute to fortune or to virtue that which, without one or the other, was accomplished by him. In other words, those things you cannot. In other words, you cannot contribute what he accomplished, right? Cannot be attributed to fortune or to virtue. So, because it's in other words, he's saying that it's through wickedness, right? This is the okay. Now that's the ancient example. Now let's go to the modern example. In our times, in the reign of Alexander VI, Liberto of Fermo. Now, this is again the note there. Fermo is a veto effici de Fermo. It's chapter 7. He took Fermo in December 1501, right? So the veto of Fermo, having been left fatherless a few years earlier, while still little, was raised by one of his maternal uncles, a man named Giovanni Fogellini. And in the beginning of his youth, he was apprenticed to a soldier under Paolo Veretti. So Veretti, I think, is one of the mercenary captains, right? Great Veretti was one of the most reputed of the Congarte mercenaries, right? He commanded the Florentine army in the war against Pisa, was suspected of treason, condemned to death, and beheaded in 1499. So again, this is in other words, someone who's considered a great military leader, but accused of treason and killed. So that replete with that discipline, he might attain some excellent rank in the militia. In other words, he was raised by that man, and in youth he was apprenticed under this, and repeated with that discipline, he might obtain an excellent rank in the militia. Afterwards, when Paolo was dead, he soldiered with Vintellizilo, Paulo's brother, and in a very short time, by being ingenious and vigorous, by being ingenuous and vigorous in his person and mind, he became the first man in the militia. So ingenious, in other words, he's ingenious, being ingenious, smart, wise, discovering new ways of doing things, right? And vigorous in his person and mind, he became the first man of his militia. But since it seemed he was a servile thing to be under, to him, it seemed to him a servile thing to be under others. He thought, with the aid of some citizens of Fermo, to whom service was dearer than the liberty of their fatherland, and with the favor of Vintelli, the brother, I suspect, to seize Fermo. In other words, he did not think, in other words, he himself thought it was servile to be under others, so he wanted to be in charge. And he conspired with people who prefer what? What does they prefer? These people, his friends or these men. In other words, the aid of some citizens of Fermo, whom serving was dearer than liberty of their fatherland. That servitude to him or others. In other words, he wrote to Giovanni Fuganelli, his uncle, right, maternal uncle, explaining how, having been many years away from home, he wanted to return to see him and his city, and to acknowledge in some part his patrimony, right? And because he had not worn himself out in labor other than to acquire honor, in order that his fellow citizens would see that he had not spent his time in vain, he wanted to return honorably, accompanied by 100 horse of his friends and servants. And he prayed that Fogellini be pleased to order that the people of Fermi, might receive him honorably, and that he would give honor not only to him, Giovanni, but also to himself, since he had been his pupil, right? The person who's cared for this. Giovanni, therefore, did not fail in any due office towards his nephew. He made the Fermi, the leaders, the people of Fermi, receive him honorably. Levetto lodged him in his own houses. In other words, his estates, right? 7. He owned several houses in the city, which his entourage occupied, right? Where he waited to order secretly that which was necessary for his future wickedness. Levetto lodged in his own houses, he had some houses, where he waited he waited to order secretly that which necessary to be his wickedness. Some days had passed. He had given him a most solemn banquet, to which he invited Giovanni Fugelli and all the first men of Fermo. And when the meal and the other entertainments that are usual at such banquets were over, Liberto, with art, moved a certain serious arguments, speaking of the greatness of Pope Alexander and of his son Cesare and of their enterprises. So he brought a controversial theme up, right? He with some merit, he brought this in. Giovanni and the others responding to these arguments, right? They responded to the arguments. So, and it says, he suddenly rose up saying that these things which one ought to speak of in a more secret place. So therefore, let's not do it. Let's speak it more quiet place, more secure place, because these things are controversial, right? These are very So he retired to a room when Giovanni and all the other citizens followed him. Or in other words, they went to a more recluded room, secret room, right? Retired into a room. They were no sooner seated than the soldiers came out from secret places and killed Giovanni and all the others. So they came out and then killed all the others, right? They came into the secret room, they sat down, and then all of a sudden, people out of the secret hiding places, the soldiers came out and killed Giovanni and the others. After that homicide, Liberto mounted a horse and coursing the town, besieging the supreme magistrate in the palace. So, from fear, they were constrained to obey him and to form a government of which he was made a prince. Therefore, the supreme magistrate was there, and he besieged them, and he forced them to form a government. Since all those were dead, who would have been malcontented and able to harm him, he strengthened himself with new civil and military orders. In such a mode, in the year that he held the principate, not only was he safe in the city of Fermo, but all his neighbors feared him. Right. So therefore, his neighbors feared him. His neighbors feared him. That was, he was able to hold it. But you notice it's the year he held the principate. Not only was he safe in Fermo, but his neighbors feared him. And to overthrow him would have been difficult as overthrowing Agathocles, had he not let himself be deceived by Borgia when at Signavelli, as had been said above. Now, Cesare took the Orselian Vintelli, and where having also had, in other words, where having also been taken by him 1 year after he committed the parricide, he was together with Vintezzo and had been his teacher in virtue and wickedness strangled. In other words, at Sigarella, what happened was that Cesare kind of did the same thing, killed all the leaders of the Orselli and Vintelli arms, which you talked about Cesare, right? Borgia dealt with the Orsini and Vintelli arms, the very forces that were kind of the leading the military arms, the families that were opposition to Borgia's in the Romagna, right? And the papal lands, the Roman princes, right? The Roman princes, but the Roman nobles, right? The two families that were kind of threatening, challenging him. So he killed these arms, right? These mercenary arms tied to those houses that he, you know, you know. So therefore, after 1 year after he committed the parricide, he was together with Vintelli, the person who kind of trained after, under him. In other words, the mercenary leader under him that was tied to these arms, right? Uh, they were strangled. Okay, so he was, in other words, he was. In other words, he would have had the same. Unlike, in other words, there is a difference. Agathocles was not fooled. Where the modern example here, the modern example is lesser than the ancient example. Why? Because his mind did not. He was fooled, deceived by Cesare. Right? One might doubt whence it arose that Agathocles and others like him had infinite treacheries and cruelties, could live a long live safe in their fatherland and defend themselves against external enemies, and yet never have the citizens conspire against them, since there had been many others who had not been able to maintain the state through cruelty even in peaceful times, not to mention the dubious times of war. So, in other words, notice that he brings up the modern example, but then he then focuses here. One doubted Agathocles and others like him, after infinite treacheries and cruelties, could live long safe in their fatherland and defend themselves against external enemies and never have the citizens conspire against them, not only in times of peace, but in dubious times of war, right? That, in other words, that was maintained the state through cruelty, even in times of peace, not to mention dubious times of war. I believe that this comes to pass from cruelty badly used or well used. In other words, this is where he brings his famous line about the question of cruelty. In other words, this is that it's that the difference why those people who use cruelty, the people who were, in other words, those people who use cruelty to rule, and then the example of Agathocles and others who, Agathocles, who is able to do it, is the difference between cruelty well used or badly used. In other words, badly used or well used. Well used one is able to call those cruelties, if called those things, right? If one is may lawfully call the bad good, which are done at one stroke for the necessity of securing oneself, and which are afterwards not continued within, but converted to the greatest possible utility of the subjects. So therefore, in other words, you can't really, in other words, be able to call those cruelties, which one may not lawfully call the bad good, which are done at one stroke for the necessity of securing oneself, which are afterwards not continued, but converted to the greatest possible utility of the subjects, the benefit of the subjects. Badly used are those which, even though they're at the beginning few, soon increase with time, rather than become extinguished. In other words, the badly used cruelty is a little bit of cruelty, not a lot. In other words, even though they're the beginning few, but they soon increase at time, rather than become extinguished. Those who observe the first mode, in other words, if you use cruelty well, those who observe the first mode, cruelty well used, are able to have some remedy for their state with God, and as that's interesting, God. Notice that make a state, and with men, as Agathocles did. Now this is very interesting. 9. The belief in cruelty well used is quite literally Machiavelli's credo. Right? Such a belief permits, as he says, to redeem oneself, reconcile one with man and God. See chapter 8 and chapter 12 below. Right. So, in other words, Agathocles, the Agathocles. As for the others, it is impossible that they maintain themselves. In other words, they didn't maintain themselves. They didn't maintain themselves because they used cruelty badly. They didn't follow the right mode. Agathocles, the example of Agathocles succeeds because he used cruelty well. Now that's important. So the lesson of the wickedness is not that wickedness is the usefulness of itself, but remember, it's a wickedness that what it does what it is done at one stroke for the necessity of securing oneself, and which are afterwards not continued within this thing, but converted to the greatest possible utility of the subjects. Last paragraph. Whence it is to be noted that in taking a state, the occupier ought to reason out all those offenses that are necessary for him to do, and to do them at one stroke, in order not to have to renew them daily. So, in other words, you should think about when you're going to take over a state and occupy it and do that things. You better do all the nasty, do what you need to do right away at one stroke, not keep on doing it. Do it everything at once. Why? He is thus able, not by innovating them, to assure men and gain them to himself by benefiting them. In other words, he is able, not by innovating them, innovating what necessary things of all time, right? But he's able to assure men and gain them to himself by benefiting them. Whoever does otherwise, either from timidity or bad counsel, is always necessitated to hold the knife in hand. Nor can he ever rely on his subjects, since they are unable, because of fresh and continuous injuries, to assure themselves of him. So remember, the cruelty badly used is you do it at once, right away. You do everything you need to do once, and then make sure what is done benefits the society, the group, the whole, the body politic, the whole, the subjects, their benefit. And you don't have to do it. They forget. In other words, they as one stroke, not to have to renew them. He is able to assure men by gaining and benefiting them to himself by benefiting them. Now, anyone who thinks, "Oh no, you can't do that. You have to keep constantly. You can't go too much. You can't do it too." They're timid. They're afraid that I can't use it all that much force. In other words, I'm timidity or bad counsel. They keep on holding the knife. They keep power, right? These people, the subjects can never rely on them because they have fresh and continuous injuries to themselves. For all the injuries ought to be done altogether. For being tasted less, they have found less. Great line metaphor. In other words, because they're not constantly tasted, they're tasted. In other words, the offense, if you're going to court offense, right away. And they're not going to be, you hit what needs to be done. You need to take out all the things that need to be done. Do all the violence or the cruelties you need to do right away. Do everything you need to do. Don't hold back. Eliminate all the threats. Do it. Why? Because if you don't, you're going to have to do it. Oh, God, better not. I want to be merciful. I'm not going to do it. I can't do that. But then you're going to be doing it later because those threats will come to him, that they will retaliate and they'll do things. And then you're constantly causing, and therefore they're tasting the violence. They're tasting it all the time. He says that in other words, the injuries are tasted often, right? In other words, for all the injuries ought to be done altogether for being tasted less, they offend less. The benefits ought to be done little by little, so they may be tasted better. In other words, I'm going to benefit you. If I'm going to benefit you, the benefits little by little by little. So I'm going to harm you, do it quickly. But benefit you, I want you to remember the benefits. So benefit here, benefit there, benefit there, benefit there, so that they're always tasted. He says that so that they may be tasted better. And a prince ought, above all, to live with his subjects in such a mode that no one accident, either good or bad, will make him vary from his policy. In other words, no accident should change his policy. I shouldn't do that. I should live with my subjects, and I should live with his subjects in such a mode that one accident, one event, or one thing is not going to change my policy. Accident, good or bad. In other words, if something good happens, I'm not going to change. My policy is doing this. I'm not going to don't let events dictate. In other words, look for your goals, look for what your policy is going to be doing, what you want to be done, and don't let the goals change. Just know what always they should be doing. In other words, either bad or good, make him vary his policy. For necessity coming with adverse times. Now, this is that famous, I think he's going to be second person familiar. You cannot be in time with the bad. You can, in other words, for necessity coming with adverse times, you cannot be in time with the bad, nor will the good that you nor will the good that you do help you, because it is judged to be forced, and you do not know any thanks. In other words, he's going to say that the good you do, right? Oh, you're doing it. In other words, they'll not judge your good, all the good you do. They'll say, no, 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 you did that for you. You did that because you had to, not because you wanted to. So you're not going to be thanked for the good you do. In other words, the good, they'll only understand the good as policy. In other words, you're not going to get any love. In other words, he's going to saying is that in an adverse time they're going to look at whatever all the good that you did is what you did it because that was your policy. You did it because you had to. Okay, and you cannot be in time with the bad to do. To get stop it, hit it, remove it. Nor will the good that you do help you in that sense, because they'll think you try to do with good things to do it, try to do good things to kind of respond to them. Oh, you're being forced. So this is the example that in adverse times when you try good things, you cannot be quick enough with the bad, and that's what you have to do. In other words, that's why you have to do all your remove your threats early, because in verse you cannot be in time with cannot be in time with the bad, and nor will the good you do, any good you do, to kind of to get people to think to ignore this. Oh, you're being forced to do it by the bad times, and therefore you do not know any thanks. And this is how he ends the chapter. Now, you guys, if you have any comments or questions, please put it below, and I'll respond to them when I see them. Um, if you have liked the chapter, like what we've done here today, please hit the like button. It helps to grow the channel. It brings attention to the algorithm and things like this. Please share it far, and if you like the video and like what we did here, bring it to the attention of others. Share it far and wide. If you have not yet subscribed, you're just new to the channel. Go. You can. I would recommend. Please do subscribe. If you're not subscribing to your channel, please subscribe. It helps grow the channel. But also go check out the other videos in this series and also the other series. Maybe you find something you like also. But keep on following us in that sense. If you didn't like it, you can always throw a thumbs down, but say why in the comments. That way people can learn. You can correct me or do something like that, learn here. Another thing you can do is if you want to follow me on social media, my social media links below. If you want to know more about me as a scholar and as a researcher and check out my research and things like that, you can check the academic social media links below this. And if you want to know, to be able to help me to do what I do in that sense, and help me contribute to this project of these things, because these take time and things, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar. The links are the links, but the URLs are below. Another thing another way you can help is by buying one of my books. My current books are listed below, and you can order them either at your local bookstore or through an online seller like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Libris, or whatever that's available to you, or through the publisher website itself, through the publisher themselves. These are the ways you can do so. And that's the way you can help. Okay, take care. I hope to see you. Next time we'll look at chapter 9, the second part of the two things that we've done. Now, in other words, we talk about wickedness. Now we're talking about the civic principle, right? So take care. Bye-bye. Have a good day.